This channel has been established for visually impaired people. For the visually impaired people, voice narration and a written expression are also provided for the hearing impaired. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. American exceptionalism is one of three related ideas. The first is that the history of the United States is inherently different from other nations. In this view, American exceptionalism stems from its emergence from the American Revolution, thereby becoming what political scientist Seymour Martin Lipset called the first new nation, and developing a uniquely American ideology, Americanism, based on liberty, egalitarianism, individualism, republicanism, democracy and laissez-faire for business. This ideology itself is often referred to as American exceptionalism. Second is the idea that the U.S. has a unique mission to transform the world. As Abraham Lincoln put it in the Gettysburg Address 1863, Americans have a duty to see that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Third is the sense that its history and its mission give the United States a superiority over other nations. Although the term does not necessarily imply superiority, many neoconservative and other American conservative writers have promoted its use in that sense. To them, the U.S. is like the biblical city upon a hill, a phrase evoked by British colonists to North America as early as 1630, and exempt from historical forces that have affected other countries. The theme of exceptionalism is a common target for attacks from liberals and groups that adhere to democratic ideologies. The theory of the exceptionalism of the U.S. can be traced to the French political scientist and historian Alexis de Tocqueville, the first writer to describe the country as exceptional in 1831 and 1840. Similar beliefs have existed historically elsewhere in the world, such as Whig history in Britain, which held that the political system of the British Empire was the apex of human development and uniquely suited to ruling foreign peoples benignly, and Sinocentrism in China, which regarded Chinese culture as more ancient than or superior to other cultures and neighboring countries as mere offshoots of China. Although neither of these views is common in the present-day contents. 1 Terminology. 2 Origin of the term. 3 History of the concept. 31 Alexis de Tocqueville and others, from 1835–32 Communist debate, 1927–33 Uniqueness. 34 21st century development. 4 Causes in their historical context. 41 Absence of feudalism. 42 Puritan Roots. 43 American Revolution and Republicanism. 44 Jefferson and the Empire of Liberty. 5 Basis of arguments. 51 Republican ethos and ideas about nationhood. 52 Global leadership and activism. 53 Frontier spirit. 54 Mobility and welfare. 6 Criticism. 61 Exceptionalism as exemptionalism. 62 Moral purity. 63 Double standards. 64 The Americanist heresy. 65 Pre-Emptive Declinism. 66 Similarities between the U.S. and Europe. 7 Current official stance and its detractors. 8 See also. 9 Notes. 10 Bibliography. 101 Primary sources. 11 External links. Terminology. The exact term American exceptionalism was occasionally used in the 19th century in his The Yale Book of Quotations. Fred Shapiro notes that exceptionalism was used to refer to the United States and its self-image by the Times of London on August 20, 1861. Its common use dates from communist usage. The late 1920s Soviet leader Joseph Stalin chastised members of the J. Lovestone-led faction of the American Communist Party for its claim that the U.S. was independent of the Marxist laws of history thanks to its natural resources, industrial capacity, and absence of rigid class distinctions. Stalin may have been told of the usage American exceptionalism by Broder of the growth of government in Europe are not expected to fit American experience, and vice versa. However, postnationalist scholars have rejected American exceptionalism, arguing that the U.S. had not broken from European history, and accordingly, the U.S. has retained class-based and race-based inequalities, as well as imperialism and willingness to wage war. In recent years, scholars from numerous disciplines, as well as politicians and commentators in the popular media, have debated the meaning and usefulness of the concept. Roberts and Dickier ask, why has the myth of American exceptionalism, characterized by a belief in America's highly distinctive features or unusual trajectory based in the abundance of its natural resources, its revolutionary origins and its Protestant religious culture that anticipated God's blessing of the nation, held such tremendous staying power, from its influence in popular culture to its critical role in foreign policy? Some historians support the concept of American exceptionalism but avoid the terminology, and thereby avoid getting entangled in rhetorical debate States. Bernard Bailyn, a leading colonial specialist at Harvard, is very clearly a believer in the distinctiveness of American civilization, although he rarely, if ever, uses the phrase American exceptionalism. He repeatedly insists upon the distinctive characteristics of British North American life. He has argued that the process of social and cultural transmission resulted in peculiarly American patterns of education in the broadest sense of the word, and he believes in the unique character of the American Revolution. Origin of the term. Although the concept of American exceptionalism dates to the founding ideas, the term was first used in the 1920s. Some claim that the phrase American exceptionalism originated with the American Communist Party in an English translation of a condemnation made in 1929 by Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, criticizing communist supporters of J. Lovestone for the heretical belief that the U.S. was independent of the Marxist laws of history thanks to its natural resources, industrial capacity, and absence of rigid class distinctions. This origin has been challenged, however, because the expression American exceptionalism was already used by Broder. Blew down the house of cards of American exceptionalism. After the 1930s, the phrase fell into obscurity for half a century, until it was popularized by American newspapers in the 1980s to describe America's cultural and political uniqueness. The phrase became an issue of contention between presidential candidates Barack Obama and John McCain in the 2008 presidential campaign, with Republicans attacking Obama for allegedly not believing in the concept. History of the concept. Alexis de Tocqueville and others. From 1835, the first reference to the concept by name, and possibly its origin, was by French writer Alexis de Tocqueville in his 1835–1840 work, Democracy in America. The position of the Americans is therefore quite exceptional, and it may be believed that no democratic people will ever be placed in a similar one. Their strictly puritanical origin, their exclusively commercial habits, even the country they inhabit, which seems to divert their minds from the pursuit of science, literature, and the arts, the proximity of Europe, which allows them to neglect these pursuits without relapsing into barbarism. 1,000 special causes, of which I have only been able to point out the most important, have singularly concurred to fix the mind of the American upon purely practical objects. His passions, his wants, his education, and everything about him seem to unite in drawing the native of the United States earthward. His religion alone bids him turn, from time to time, a transient and distracted glance to heaven. Let us cease, then, to view all democratic nations under the example of the American people. Says many foreign visitors commented on American exceptionalism, including Karl Marx, Francis Lieber, Hermann Eduard von Holst, James Bryce, H. G. Wells, G. K. Chesterton, and Hilaire Belloc. They did so in complimentary terms. The theme became common, especially in textbooks from the 1840s to the late 19th century. The McGuffey readers sold 120 million copies and were studied by most American students. Scrabbook 2009 argues that the readers hailed American exceptionalism, manifest destiny, and America as God's country. Furthermore, McGuffey saw America as having a future mission to bring liberty and democracy to the world. Communist Debate, 1927. In June 1927, J. Lovestone, a leader of the Communist Party in America and soon to be named General Secretary, described America's economic and social uniqueness. He noted the increasing strength of American capitalism, and the country's tremendous reserve power, a strength and power which he said prevented communist revolution. In 1929, the Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, disagreeing that America was so resistant to revolution, called Lovestone's ideas the heresy of American exceptionalism. The first time that the specific term American exceptionalism was used, the Great Depression seemingly underscored Stalin's argument that American capitalism falls under the general laws of Marxism. In June 1930, during the National Convention of the Communist Party USA in New York, it was declared that the storm of the economic crisis in the United States blew down the house of cards of American exceptionalism and the whole system of opportunistic theories and illusions that had been built upon American capitalist prosperity. Uniqueness. More generally, Americans have considered national uniqueness. Historian Dorothy Ross points to three different currents regarding unique characteristics. Some Protestants believed American progress would facilitate the return of Jesus Christ and Christian millennium. Some 19th-century historians linked American liberty to the development of liberty in Anglo-Saxon England. Other American writers looked to the millennial newness of America. Henry Nash Smith stressed the theme of virgin land in the American frontier that promised an escape from the decay that befell earlier republics. 21st-century development. More recently, socialists and other writers have tried to discover or describe this exceptionalism of the U.S. within and outside its borders. The concept has also been discussed. In the context of the 21st century, in a book co-authored by former American Vice President Dick Cheney, Exceptional, Why the World Needs a Powerful America 2015 causes in their historical context, scholars have explored possible justifications for the notion of American exceptionalism. Absence of feudalism. Many scholars use a model of American exceptionalism developed by Harvard political scientist Lewis Hartz in the liberal tradition in America 1955. Hartz argued that the American political tradition lacked the left-wing, socialist and right-wing, aristocratic elements that dominated in most other lands because colonial America lacked any feudal traditions, such as established churches, landed estates and a hereditary nobility. The liberal consensus school, typified by David Potter, Daniel Boorstin and Richard Hofstadter, followed Hartz in emphasizing that political conflicts in American history remained within the tight boundaries of a liberal consensus regarding private property, individual rights, and representative government. The national government that emerged was far less centralized or nationalized than its European counterparts. Puritan roots. Parts of American exceptionalism can be traced to American Puritan roots. Many Puritans with Arminian leanings embraced a middle ground between strict Calvinist predestination and a less restricting theology of divine providence. They believed God had made a covenant with their people and had chosen them to provide a model for the other nations of the earth. One Puritan leader, John Winthrop, metaphorically expressed this idea as a city upon a hill, that the Puritan community of New England should serve as a model community for the rest of the world. This metaphor is often used by proponents of exceptionalism. The Puritans' deep moralistic values remained part of the national identity of the United States for centuries, remaining influential to the present day. In this vein, Max Weber was a pioneer in delineating a connection between capitalism and exceptionalism in earlier texts. Maximiliano Korstenjay explores the American exceptionalism and its effects on the current means of productions. This contribution to the existent literature is of paramount importance for two main reasons. The first and most important, he relates capitalism to Protestantism. This is of course nothing new, since Max Weber did it in the past. However, Korstenjay adds, though Weber was correct by confirming the connection of the Reformation to capitalism, the key role played by Norse mythology was left behind. In effect, the concept of predestination as it has been discussed by Weber did not come from Luther alone, it was rather enrooted in the core of Norse culture. Secondly, this impossibility to understand the future led to English-speaking societies to construct a risk-prone culture, which resulted in what Ulrich Beck dubbed the risk society. The criticism exerted in the uneven distribution of capitalism should be explained by the economy of saved peoples formulated by Weber. American Revolution and republicanism. The ideas that created the American Revolution were derived from a tradition of republicanism that had been repudiated by the British mainstream. Historian Gordon Wood has argued, our beliefs in liberty, equality, constitutionalism, and the well-being of ordinary people came out of the revolutionary era. So too did our idea that we Americans are a special people with a special destiny to lead the world toward liberty and democracy. Wood notes that the term is presently much maligned, although it is vigorously supported by others such as John Butler. Thomas Paine's Common Sense for the first time expressed the belief that America was not just an extension of Europe but a new land, a country of nearly unlimited potential and opportunity that had outgrown the British mother country. These sentiments laid the intellectual foundations for the revolutionary concept of American exceptionalism and were closely tied to republicanism, the belief that sovereignty belonged to the people, not to a hereditary ruling class. Religious freedom characterized the American Revolution in unique ways, at a time when major nations had state religions. Republicanism led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison created modern constitutional republicanism, with a limit on ecclesiastical powers. Historian Thomas Kidd 2010 argues, with the onset of the revolutionary crisis, a major conceptual shift convinced Americans across the theological spectrum that God was raising up America for some special purpose. Kidd further argues that a new blend of Christian and Republican ideology led religious traditionalists to embrace wholesale the concept of Republican virtue, Jefferson and the Empire of Liberty. According to Tucker and Hendrickson 1992, Jefferson believed America was the bearer of a new diplomacy, founded on the confidence of a free and virtuous people, that would secure ends based on the natural and universal rights of man, by means that escaped war and its corruptions. Jefferson sought a radical break from the traditional European emphasis on reason of state, which could justify any action, and the traditional priority of foreign policy and the needs of the ruling family over the needs of the people. Jefferson envisaged America becoming the world's great empire of liberty, that is, the model for democracy and republicanism. He identified his nation as a beacon to the world, for, he said, on departing the presidency in 1809, America was trusted with the destinies of this solitary republic of the world, the only monument of human rights, and the sole depository of the sacred fire of freedom and self-government. From hence it is to be lighted up in other regions of the earth, if other regions of the earth shall ever become susceptible of its benign influence. Basis of arguments. Marilyn B. Young argues that after the end of the Cold War in 1991, neoconservative intellectuals and policymakers embraced the idea of an American empire, a national mission to establish freedom and democracy in other nations, particularly underdeveloped ones. She argues that after the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, the George W. Bush administration reoriented foreign policy to an insistence on maintaining the supreme military and economic power of America, an attitude that harmonized with this new vision of American empire. Young says the Iraq War 2003–2011 exemplified American exceptionalism. In 2012, conservative historians Larry Schweikert and Dave Doherty argued that American exceptionalism was based upon four pillars: 1 common law, 2 virtue and morality based in Protestant Christianity, 3 free market capitalism, and 4 the sanctity of private property. In a 2015 book entitled Exceptional: Why the World Needs a Powerful America, former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney sets out and argues the case for American exceptionalism, and concludes, "We are, as Lincoln said, the last, best hope of earth. We are not just one more nation, one more indistinguishable entity on the world stage. We have been essential to the preservation and progress of freedom, and those who lead us in the years ahead must remind us, as Roosevelt, Kennedy, and Reagan did, of the special role we play. Neither they nor we should ever forget that we are, in fact, exceptional." Republican ethos and ideas about nationhood. Proponents of American exceptionalism argue that the United States is exceptional in that it was founded on a set of Republican ideals, rather than on a common heritage, ethnicity, or ruling elite. In the formulation of President Abraham Lincoln in his Gettysburg Address, America is a nation conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. In Lincoln's interpretation, America is inextricably connected with liberty and equality, and in world perspective the American mission is to ensure, that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Historian T. Harry Williams argues that Lincoln believed, in the United States man would create a society that would be the best and the happiest in the world. The United States was the supreme demonstration of democracy, but the Union did not exist just to make men free in America. It had an even greater mission to make them free everywhere. By the mere force of its example, America would bring democracy to an undemocratic world. American policies have been characterized since their inception by a system of federalism between the states and the federal government, and checks and balances among the legislative, executive and judicial branches, which were designed to prevent any faction, region, or government organ from becoming too powerful. Some proponents of the theory of American exceptionalism argue that this system and the accompanying distrust of concentrated power prevent the United States from suffering a tyranny of the majority, are preservative of a free republican democracy, and also that it allows citizens to live in a locality whose laws reflect those citizens' values. A consequence of this political system is that laws can vary greatly across the country. Critics of American exceptionalism maintain that this system merely replaces the power of the national majority over states with power by the states over local entities. On balance, the American political system arguably allows for more local dominance but prevents more national dominance than does a more unitary system. Historian Eric Foner has explored the question of birthright citizenship, the provision of the 14th Amendment 1868 that makes every baby born in the United States a full citizen. He argues that, birthright citizenship stands as an example of the much abused idea of American exceptionalism. Birthright citizenship does make the United States along with Canada unique in the developed world. No European nation recognizes the principle. Global leadership and activism. Yale Law School Dean Harold Hongju Ko has identified what he says as the most important respect in which the United States has been genuinely exceptional, with regard to international affairs, international law, and promotion of human rights, namely, in its exceptional global leadership and activism. He argues, to this day, the United States remains the only superpower capable, and at times willing, to commit real resources and make real sacrifices to build, sustain, and drive an international system committed to international law, democracy, and the promotion of human rights. Experience teaches that when the United States leads on human rights, from Nuremberg to Kosovo, other countries follow. Peggy Noonan, an American political pundit, wrote in The Wall Street Journal that America is not exceptional because it has long attempted to be a force for good in the world, it attempts to be a force for good because it is exceptional. Former U.S. Vice President Dick Cheney explores the concept of United States global leadership in a 2015 book on American foreign policy entitled Exceptional: Why the World Needs a Powerful America, co-authored with his daughter, Liz Cheney, a former official of the United States Department of State. Frontier spirit. Proponents of American exceptionalism often claim that many features of the American spirit were shaped by the frontier process. Following Frederick Jackson Turner's frontier thesis, they argue the American frontier allowed individualism to flourish as pioneers adopted democracy and equality and shed centuries-old European institutions such as royalty, standing armies, established churches and a landed aristocracy that owned most of the land. However, this frontier experience was not entirely unique to the United States. Other nations had frontiers, but it did not shape them nearly as much as the American frontier did, usually because it was under the control of a strong national government. South Africa, Russia, Brazil, Argentina, Canada and Australia had long frontiers, but they did not have free land and local control. The political and cultural environments were much different. The other frontiers did not involve widespread ownership of free land nor allow the settlers to control the local and provincial governments. As in America, their frontier did not shape their national psyches. Each nation had quite different frontier experiences. For example, the Dutch Boers in South Africa were defeated in war by Britain. In Australia, mateship and working together was valued more than individualism was. In the United States, mobility and welfare, further information, economic mobility and social mobility. For most of its history, especially from the mid-19th to early 20th centuries, the United States has been known as the land of opportunity, and in this sense, it prided and promoted itself on providing individuals with the opportunity to escape from the contexts of their class and family background. Examples of this social mobility include occupational. Children could easily choose careers which were not based upon their parents' choices. Physical, that geographical location was not seen as static, and citizens often relocated freely over long distances without barrier status. As in most countries, family standing and riches were often a means to remain in a higher social circle. America was notably unusual due to an accepted wisdom that anyone, from impoverished immigrants upwards, who worked hard, could aspire to similar standing, regardless of circumstances of birth. This aspiration is commonly called living the American dream. Birth circumstances generally were not taken as a social barrier to the upper echelons or to high political status in American culture. This stood in contrast to other countries where many higher offices were socially determined, and usually hard to enter without being born into the suitable social group. However, social mobility in the U.S. is lower than in a number of European Union countries if defined in terms of income movements. American men born into the lowest income quintile are much more likely to stay there compared to similar men in the Nordic countries or the United Kingdom. Many economists, such as Harvard economist N. Gregory Mankiw, however, state that the discrepancy has little to do with class rigidity, rather, it is a reflection of income disparity. Moving up and down a short ladder is a lot easier than moving up and down a tall one. Regarding public welfare, Richard Rose asked in 1989 whether the evidence shows whether the U.S. is becoming more like other mixed economy welfare states, or increasingly exceptional. He concludes, by comparison with other advanced industrial nations, America is today exceptional in total public expenditure, in major program priorities, and in the value of public benefits. Criticism. Scholars have been polarized on the topic. Historians have generally weighed against it, while empirical social scientists have been supporters. Michael Kamen reports that historians Lawrence Vasey, C. Van Woodward, Eric Foner, Sean Wilentz, Akira Iriye, and Ian Tyrrell have been opponents, while support has come from social scientists Daniel Bell, Seymour Martin Lipset, Alex Inkeles, Sanford Jacoby, Samuel P. Huntington, Mona Harrington, John P. Roche, Richard Rose, Peter Temin, and Aaron Wildavsky. Kamen argues that the hostile attacks began in the 1970s in the wake of the Vietnam War, when many intellectuals decided, the American Adam had lost his innocence and given way to a helpless, tarnished Gulliver. At about the same time, the new social history used statistical techniques on population samples that seemed to show resemblances with Europe. Europe on issues such as social mobility. By the 1980s, labor historians were emphasizing that the failure of a Labor Party to emerge in the United States does not mean that America was exceptionally favorable grounds for workers. By the late 1980s, other academic critics started mocking the excessive chauvinism displayed by popular usage of exceptionalism. Finally, mid-1980s, colonial historians downplayed the uniqueness of the American experience in the context of British history. On the other hand, some of the critics pulled their punches, with Wilentz arguing for distinctively American forms of class conflict and Foner saying there was a distinctive character of American trade unionism. The third idea of American exceptionalism, superiority, has been attacked with charges of moral defectiveness and the existence of double standards in American exceptionalism and human rights. 2005, Canadian commentator Michael Ignatieff couches his discussion of the topic in entirely pejorative terms. He identifies three main subtypes: exemptionalism, supporting treaties as long as U.S. citizens are exempt from them; double standards, criticizing others for not heeding the findings of international human rights bodies, but ignoring what these bodies say of the United States; and legal isolationism, the tendency of U.S. judges to ignore other jurisdictions. Exceptionalism as exemptionalism during the George W. Bush administration 2001–2009, the term was somewhat abstracted from its historical context. Proponents and opponents alike began using it to describe a phenomenon wherein certain political interests view the United States as being above or an exception to the law, specifically the law of nations. This phenomenon is less concerned with justifying American uniqueness than with asserting its immunity to international law. This new use of the term has served to confuse the topic and muddy the waters, since its unilateralist emphasis and historical orientation diverge somewhat from older uses of the term. A certain number of those who subscribe to old style or traditional American exceptionalism, the idea that America is a more nearly exceptional nation than are others, that it differs qualitatively from the rest of the world and has a special role to play in world history, also agree that the United States is and ought to be fully subject to and bound by the public international law. Indeed, recent research shows that there is some indication for American exceptionalism among the public, but very little evidence of unilateral attitudes. On September 12, 2013, in the context on U.S. President Barack Obama's comment about American exceptionalism during his September 10, 2013 talk to the American people while considering military action on Syria for its alleged use of chemical weapons against civilians, Russian President Vladimir Putin criticized Obama, saying that it is extremely dangerous to encourage people to see themselves as exceptional, whatever the motivation. In his interview with RT on October 4, 2013, President of Ecuador Rafael Correa criticized Obama's policies and compared America's exceptionalism with Nazi Germany, saying, "Does not this remind you of the Nazis' rhetoric before and during World War II? They considered themselves the chosen race, the superior race, etc. Such words and ideas pose extreme danger." Moral purity critics on the left such as Marilyn Young and Howard Zinn have argued that American history is so morally flawed, citing slavery, civil rights and social welfare issues, that it cannot be an exemplar of virtue. Zinn argues that American exceptionalism cannot be of divine origin because it was not benign, especially when dealing with Native Americans. Donald E. Pease mocks American exceptionalism as a «state fantasy» and a «myth» in his 2009 book The New American Exceptionalism. Pease notes that «state fantasies cannot altogether conceal the inconsistencies they mask, showing how such events as the revelations of prisoner abuse at Abu Ghraib prison and the exposure of government incompetence after Hurricane Katrina opened fissures in the myth of exceptionalism." American theologian Reinhold Niebuhr argued that the automatic assumption that America acts for the good will bring about moral corruption. However, Niebuhr did support the nation's Cold War policies. His position, called Christian realism, advocated a liberal notion of responsibility that justified interference in other nations' double standards. U.S. historians like Thomas Bender try and put an end to the recent revival of American exceptionalism, a defect he esteems to be inherited from the Cold War. Gary W. Reichert and Ted Dixon argue how the development of the United States has always depended on its transactions with other nations for commodities, cultural values and populations. Roger Cohen asks, how exceptional can you be when every major problem you face, from terrorism to nuclear proliferation to gas prices, requires joint action? Harold Coe distinguishes distinctive rights, different labels, the flying buttress mentality, and double standards. He fourth face, double standards, presents the most dangerous and destructive form of American exceptionalism. Godfrey Hodgson also concludes that the U.S. national myth is dangerous. Samantha Power asserts that we're neither the shining example, nor even competent meddlers. It's going to take a generation or so to reclaim American exceptionalism. The Americanist Heresy main article, Americanism Heresy. In 1898 Pope Leo XIII denounced what he deemed to be the heresy of Americanism in the encyclical Testem Benevolentiae Nostrae. He targeted American exceptionalism in the ecclesiastical domain, arguing that it stood in opposition to papal denunciations of modernism at the end of the 19th century. There was a tendency among Catholic clergy in the United States to view American society as inherently different from other Christian nations, and to argue that the understanding of church doctrine had to be enlarged in order to encompass the American experience, which included greater individualism, tolerance of other religions, and church-state separation. Pre-emptive declinism. Herbert London has defined pre-emptive declinism as a postmodern belief that the United States is not an exceptional nation and is not entitled by virtue of history to play a role on the world stage different from other nations. London ascribed the view to Paul Krugman. Among others, Krugman had written in the New York Times that we've always known that America's reign as the world's greatest nation would eventually end, but most of us imagined that our downfall, when it came, would be something grand and tragic. According to Real Clear Politics, declarations of America's declining power have been common in the English-language media. In 1988, Flora Lewis said that talk of U.S. decline is real in the sense that the U.S. can no longer pull all the levers of command or pay all the bills. According to Anthony Lewis in 1990, Europeans and Asians are already finding confirmation of their suspicion that the United States is in decline, citing America's dependence on foreign sources for energy and crucial weaknesses in the military. Tom Wicker concluded that maintaining superpower status is becoming more difficult, nearly impossible, for the United States. In 2004, Pat Buchanan lamented the decline and fall of the greatest industrial republic the world had ever seen. In 2007, Matthew Paris of the Sunday Times in London wrote that the United States is overstretched, romantically recalling the Kennedy presidency, when America had the best arguments and could use moral persuasion rather than force to have its way in the world. From his vantage point in Shanghai, the International Herald Tribune's Howard French worries about the declining moral influence of the United States over an emergent China. In his book, The Post-American World, Newsweek editor Fareed Zakaria refers to a post-American world that he says is not about the decline of America, but rather about the rise of everyone else. Similarities between the US and Europe. In December 2009, historian Peter Baldwin published a book arguing that, despite widespread attempts to contrast the American way of life and the European social model, America and Europe are actually very similar on a number of social and economic indices. Baldwin claimed that the black underclass accounts for many of those few areas where a stark difference exists between the US and Europe, such as homicide and child poverty. The historian Felipe Fernández Armesto argues that it is commonly thought that all people consider themselves exceptional in most cases in which this subject is broached. The similarities between the conflicting parties outweigh the differences. Things such as the dynamic wealth creation, the democracy, the accessibility of opportunity, the cult of civil liberty, the tradition of tolerance, and what Fernández Armesto considers evils such as the materialistic economy, the excessive privileges of wealth, and the selective illiberality are common features in many modern societies. However, he adds, America is made exceptional by the intensity with which these characteristics are concentrated. Their current official stance and its detractors. In April 2009, U.S. President Barack Obama responded to a journalist's question in Strasbourg with the statement, "I believe in American exceptionalism, just as I suspect that the Brits believe in British exceptionalism and the Greeks believe in Greek exceptionalism." Obama further noted that, "I see no contradiction between believing that America has a continued extraordinary role in leading the world towards peace and prosperity and recognizing that leadership is incumbent, depends on, our ability to create partnerships because we create partnerships because we can't solve these problems alone." Mitt Romney attacked Obama's statement, arguing it showed Obama did not believe in American exceptionalism. Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee said that Obama's worldview is dramatically different from any president, Republican or Democrat we've had. He grew up more as a globalist than an American. To deny American exceptionalism is in essence to deny the heart and soul of this nation. In a speech on the Syria crisis on September 10, 2013, Obama said, "But when, with modest effort and risk, we can stop children from being gassed to death, and thereby make our own children safer over the long run, I believe we should act. That's what makes America different, that's what makes us exceptional." In a direct response the next day, Russian President Vladimir Putin published an op-ed in the New York Times, articulating that it is extremely dangerous to encourage people to see themselves as exceptional. Whatever the motivation, we are all different, but when we ask for the Lord's blessings, we must not forget that God created us equal. Putin's views were soon endorsed by the former, and future, presidential candidate Donald Trump, who declared the op-ed a masterpiece to British television personality Piers Morgan. You think of the term as being fine, but all of a sudden you say, what if you're in Germany or Japan or any one of 100 different countries? You're not going to like that term. Trump said, it's very insulting, and Putin really put it to him about that. Some left-wing American commentators agree with Trump's stance. One example is Sheryl Schweninger, a co-founder of the New America Foundation, who in a 2016 Nation magazine symposium remarked that Trump would redefine American exceptionalism by bringing an end to the neoliberal, neoconservative globalist project that Hillary Clinton and many Republicans support. See also American civil religion, American imperialism, Americanization, Americentrism, anti-Americanism, moral equivalence, Juche nationalist, North Korean state ideology, Sonderweg, German exceptionalism, Yamato Damashi, Japanese spirit, Nihonjinran, Japanese uniqueness. Notes Winfried Fluck, Donald E. Pease, John Carlos Rowe 2011 Reframing the Transnational Turn in American Studies, University Press of New England p. 17–19, 165–74, 197. Harold Coe, America's Jekyll and Hyde Exceptionalism, in Michael Ignatieff, ed., American Exceptionalism and Human Rights, p. 112. Herman Cain, In Defense of American Exceptionalism. The American Spectator, March 3, 2011. Quote, the conditions American exceptionalism provides, allow us to enjoy the economic and social mobility that other countries envy, and progressivism rejects American exceptionalism. De Tocqueville, Alexis Democracy in America 1840, Part 2, p. 36. The position of the Americans is therefore quite exceptional, and it may be believed that no other democratic people will ever be placed in a similar one. Herbert Butterfield 1931 to The Underlying Assumption. The Whig Interpretation of History. Donald E. Pease 2009 The New American Exceptionalism U of Minnesota Press p. Ivia, Robert L., Ginnerb, Oscar 2009 American Exceptionalism in a Democratic Idiom, Transacting the Mythos of Change in the 2008 Presidential Campaign Communication Studies 64–359–75 doi, 101,08010,510,970,903,109,961. Exceptionalism. The Atlantic, March 15, 2012 retrieved 13 September 2013. Hart's thesis in the Settler Societies of 19th-century United States and Australia, Australasian Journal of American Studies 14 115–41 JSTOR. Gordon Wood, Introduction in Idea of America, Reflections on the Birth of the United States 2011 online. Gordon S. Wood 2009 The Purpose of the Past, Reflections on the Uses of History. Penguin p. 978-1-59523-089-8 and A Patriot's History of the Modern World, Volume 2, From the Cold War to the Age of Entitlement, 1945–2012 Sentinel ISBN 978-1-59523-104-8. Cheney, Dick and Liz Cheney Exceptional, Why the World Needs a Powerful America, Threshold Editions, New York, 2015 pp 259 FISBN 978-1-5011-1541-7. T. Harry Williams, Abraham Lincoln Principle and Pragmatism in Politics, a review article, Mississippi Valley Historical Review 1953–40 No. 1 pp 89–106 at page 97 in JSTOR. Robert Allen Dahl 1997 Toward Democracy A Journey, Reflections, 1940–1997 Institute of Governmental Studies Press, University of California, Berkeley p. Walker D. Wyman and Clifton B. Kroeber, eds Frontier in Perspective 1957. Marvin K. Mikesell, Comparative Studies in Frontier History, in Richard Hofstadter and Seymour Martin Lipset, eds Turner and the Sociology of the Frontier 1968 pp 152–72. Carroll, Dennis 1982 Mateship and Individualism in Modern Australian Drama Theatre Journal 34 4–467–80 JSTOR. De Grauwe, Paul July 2, 2007 Structural Rigidities in the US and Europe retrieved January 1, 2010. Thim, Johannes American Exceptionalism, Conceptual Thoughts and Empirical Evidence PDF Berlin retrieved 29 October 2013.